All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to today's live. My name is Brooke Kelley, and I will be going live every Tuesday at 9:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, 12:30 Eastern. Today's topic that we received quite a few emails about was the topic of growth. And you could take a look at growth from the standpoint of the growth of your team, depending on your role, or maybe you think of it from the standpoint of growing your business, growing your company. So when we take a look at growth, a lot of times what people want to talk about is how to grow, which makes sense. And it certainly is the more optimistic side of growth. But some of the questions that came in made me think about that one thing that often gets overlooked when we're looking at this subject of growth, because I think it's maybe just not quite as pleasant as looking at what you want to do with growth and how you'd like to grow, which is very important to focus on what you're wanting. I do agree. But I also think it's very important to take a look at what are the threats to growth. As a business coach for almost 2 decades to some of the top performers inside of Wall Street, as well as C-suite execs and leadership, I've had an opportunity and a window into the key things that threaten growth. So I wanted to go through some of those, and you can begin to kind of think about whether or not these apply to you. I am, in full disclosure, getting used to Facebook Live. So if you have questions, please be persistent. I'm getting used to all of it, but I really do want to interact with you and make a difference for you. And I'm hopeful that every Tuesday it will make sense for you to join because you see real value. So when we take a look at threats to growth, there are a couple that I've identified that are very standard for teams, for businesses. The first is mental discipline or lack thereof. So when we're taking a look at what threatens growth, often you see leaders and leadership that are drifting, that they have a goal and they allow different events, almost like gravity, to move them away from that goal. Or maybe there are distractions or challenges that they allow to impede their ability to stay on course. So I would say that drifting is one of the threats to growth. Another one of the threats to growth, as I just mentioned, are distractions. So the ability to contain those distractions is a huge, huge asset when we're talking about the threats to growth. These are certainly not the only under the category of mental discipline, but those are definitely two majors. The second area that I would say is leadership and business acumen, meaning there's a lack of it. For those of you that have read The E-Myth by Michael Gerber, you're probably familiar with this concept that so many people start out as a technician. They start out as a great financial advisor. They start out as a great dentist. They start out as a great technician of sorts. And then because of their success in that craft, they end up realizing they have an expanded business, but they really don't have a business. They just have a lot more complexity because they were so talented. That doesn't equal business acumen. So when we take a look at the threats to growth, a lack of business acumen, which might even include the ability to scale or the ability to know who to hire to help you scale so that you can scale and so that you can remain in your lane. So certainly a lack of business acumen, which tends to have that individual lack the ability to lead in the direction of growth. So when you lack order and therefore lack the ability to scale, I jokingly but seriously say you don't have a business, you have a bake sale, right? A business can be scaled, bake sales cannot be. And as insulting as that can sound, that is certainly not my intention, but it does get people's attention. If you cannot scale your business, then you don't have a business. You might have a product that people want that is in demand. You might have payroll. You might have articles of incorporation, but the ability to scale comes with having a real business, and the ability to scale is certainly very connected to the ability to grow. Without order, you can't scale. So when we talk about leadership and business acumen, we're talking about certain key aspects of a business in place divisions, departments, roles, responsibilities, process, checklists. If you thought about your business like an assembly line, right? If we're going to manufacture a car, I'll pick a Maserati. If I'm going to manufacture that car at the front end of that assembly line, I should have certain raw products. At the end, I should have a Maserati, and that should be predictable, and that should be something that I can scale. Without order, without systems, without roles and responsibility, without process, that is a very difficult assembly line to have great speed, certainty, and growth taking place. The next thing is there are businesses that have order, meaning you have even standard operating procedure written down possibly, but what you don't have are individuals who are compliant with those standard operating procedures. So really you might as well not have those standard operating procedures, because here on planet Earth, they don't exist for people. They might exist for you because you authored them and you understand the value of them. But if the individuals around you are not actually using those systems, then you might as well not have them, because that idea that you have them when they're not being used is giving you a false sense of success or confidence in that direction. The degree to which a system is being used, the degree to which compliance is actually taking place, is the degree to which you actually have order. Without that, you don't have order. You have a lot of things that you've written up that you know would make a difference, and no one is using them. So another threat to growth is a lack of compliance. And yes, I did take notes or make notes. Another huge threat to growth is a toxic culture. I can't tell you how many teams I've coached where it is very apparent that there's a team member, for better or for worse, and they're not always bad people, but they are not in alignment with the culture, and they create just enough chaos, just enough turbulence, just enough chaos. I'm going to go back to that word. And they are ongoingly a threat because they are not someone who allows the team to just flow. So that could be through gossip. It could be through errors. I always find it interesting, Serrano, and I have seen so often, we now have coined the phrase, beware of the arsonist who also puts out fires. We often see that these team members, the reason they're allowed to stay for as long as they're allowed to stay, which would be the next logical question, right, is because they set the fires and then they're the hero that comes in and puts them out. So team leaders don't always feel like they can lose those people. But in reality, if you began to look at how many fires they actually set, you would realize that their skill at putting them out is not as valuable as you may have given them credit for. I know it's not always as easy as that, but I would encourage you to take a look at toxic team members and the degree to which they are creating or setting fires, and then also helpful at putting them out. And they create this sense of you needing them. They can also be responsible for a lot of attrition for other good people around you, because team members that are healthy and productive don't always want to have that in their environment. In fact, most times they don't. So sometimes you'll just see a diminishment of their own performance, and sometimes you'll see them leave, which will also then have you as team leader or business owner feeling like you need this person more because they stay and they seem loyal, but they're actually a huge part of the turnover. When we take a look at this subject, the fourth area is complexity. Typically, as any business or team becomes more successful, there is more complexity that accompanies that success. And when there is more complexity that accompanies that, if you are not always creating capacity in excess of the complexity that your team or your business is experiencing, you will have one of two things happen. You will have painful growth, and or you will not want to grow. You will feel like you need to contract, because every time you go to grow, things will break down. And sometimes what we see are teams and individuals associating growth with pain, because every time they've reached to grow, that which was not handled becomes a blaring red flag. So we take a look at what are the complexities that exist in your business? Take a look at them, make a list of them, mind dump them. And when I say complexity, these are areas where you maybe don't have a ton of experience, or you don't have a lot of mentorship or coaching or mastery, but it has evolved as your business has grown. Those are areas where you need to bring in capacity. Sometimes I see individuals that, as they become more successful as their own brand, are finding that they have more complexity in their personal life because they're needing to juggle a lot more than they previously did. So this is where you need to be taking a look at home. How could you be creating more capacity? I had a coaching client years ago who used to be able to do a lot more for his wife around the house. And as his business grew, he couldn't. He is one of the top financial advisors in the world. And what we did was we actually looked at what are the areas at home that are ongoingly becoming pain points for him. And we found a Manny, which is a male nanny, right? So this is an individual who could handle the things that this individual could no longer, or it no longer made sense for him to handle. So when you take a look at your world, I want you to be thinking about where you have complexity, where you have demands that seem to exceed the amount of time, talent, competence, mastery that you have, and then begin to mind dump what are some things that would bring you greater capacity in those areas. So that fourth point is really about complexity, needing to always be exceeded by capacity. The fifth point are external threats. So I think in the last year and some change as far as months, we've all experienced the external threat of COVID. For certain business owners, that word pivot was, I believe, overused, but appropriate. The degree to which, the speed at which, the certainty at which, the precision with which a business was able to pivot away from the external threat known as COVID really did begin to define their ability to survive the last year. So when you take a look at COVID, it's an obvious external threat, but there are others. So one of the other external threats can be bad PR, meaning your team or your firm is having negative PR. And that is an external threat to your team that you need to be out promoting. So anything that we take a look at as an external threat must be out promoted through PR, marketing, word of mouth, advocates that are willing to speak up for you and become what we would refer to as goodwill ambassadors on your behalf. But once again, you must always be exceeding the external threats with promotion of your good works and your competence. Another one of the external threats can be a team member or an associate inside of your company that leaves and takes clients. Now they are an external threat. They're outside of your team. So taking a look at how do you keep good people? How do you retain those individuals? How do you have them not become an external threat? Are you in fact promoting internally? I know at the Kelley Group, we spent years promoting to financial advisors, to leadership inside of the financial service industry, but we haven't always promoted to individuals that might want to work inside of the Kelley Group. That's been a weakness of ours, one that we're working on. And so I would say, I'd be the first to say I'm not an expert in doing that, but I know the threat that it has been to growth. The final area that I would say threatens growth is a lack of willingness to evolve. That might be an unwillingness to evolve around technology. It might be a lack of willingness to evolve around your own personal growth. It might be an unwillingness to evolve your systems. It might be an unwillingness to actually take a look at the statistics of the current team, not what you guys did 6 months ago or pre-COVID or when you were doing well, but really getting real about the current statistics and taking a look at, are you willing to invest time, money, energy into, in the current moment, what is most needed for your team to evolve, which may also threaten you? The same client that I mentioned that we found the nanny for has always said to me, which I've found to be very true, that the degree to which he's working on his self-development and the degree to which he's pursuing that is always commensurate with, equal to his business development. So if these were two pipelines, if he took a look at how much time and energy he's investing into his own growth as a human being, and then he were to take a look at how flush is his pipeline, that these two things are one in the same. You can draw your own conclusions about why that might be, but this is something that he and I have observed statistically, in his case, for almost 12 years. When you take a look at what it takes to continue to be successful, you are either expanding or contracting. There is no middle. So it does make sense that a human being who's willing to evolve and willing to grow would also be someone who would likely, if they're also taking the right steps and have business acumen and they are disciplined, that they would also be seeing their pipeline grow. You might be someone who's still seeing growth in your pipeline, not pursuing growth or self-development. And you might say that you disagree, in which case that would be your prerogative, but I would have you consider what would be possible for you if you weren't resting on your old potential and what is likely stale inside of you as far as your own evolution. If you were pushing those limits through whatever form of self-development and growth would be most useful for you, what would that take? What would that look like? And then how do you see that that might impact your business development pipeline? So again, in summary, the areas that I believe most threaten growth, one would be mental discipline or lack thereof. The second would be lack of leadership or business acumen. The third would be a toxic culture, whether that's a leader or a team member that has now spread into the actual culture. There's always something that's at the source of it. Then the fourth is when your complexity begins to exceed your capacity. That is a threat to growth. The fifth area are external threats that you do not nip and address and extinguish immediately and aggressively. And the final, which would be the sixth area, would be an unwillingness to evolve. Again, that might be your own personal involvement. It might be the involvement of systems. It's really about you accepting that any organism, any human being, any business is doing one of two things. They're either growing or they're contracting. They're expanding or they're contracting. There is no other way, as much as all of us would like to believe that there are other options. There are not. So those are the threats to growth that I wanted to highlight. And I'm hopeful that you can take a look at these and see which of these you believe might be threatening you the most. If you can see that these are threatening you, what I would encourage you to do is to take each of those categories of threats and rank them on a scale of 1 to 5, one being it's the least threatening to you, 5 being it's the most threatening to you. And whichever of those 6 categories you can see has the highest score. So let's just say that you decided that toxic culture had the highest score for you. What I want you to do is I'd like you to give yourself a current score. So let's say you said, we are currently a 5, meaning our environment is very toxic. Then what I would like you to do is to think about what is the single greatest action you could take as a leader or business owner or team member to lower that score. In this case, lowering it would be a positive, not a negative, right? So if a 5 is very toxic and we want to get to a 1, what I want you to think about is in the next 90 days, what action or which actions, plural, would give you the greatest leap in that score? Might it be terminating someone? Might it be bringing in a coach or consultant that actually addresses this kind of culture? Maybe as team leader, you need to grow and evolve. But basically what I want you to take a look at is what action or actions, plural, would create the biggest jump in that score in a positive direction addressing toxic culture. And once you've decided what those actions are, the next step that I would encourage you to take would be to write those down, look at those every day, and share those with, number 1, the most important person in your personal life, and number 2, the most important stakeholder in your professional life. Make sure that you go public with that so that you have that external accountability with individuals who are not necessarily there to counsel you, but that the idea is these are people who you would never want to let down. So although they may not have the business acumen, or you may not want them to contribute to you as far as solution is concerned, if you choose the right people, your immediate internal response will be to run harder and faster and address this more thoroughly than if you allow yourself to be isolated and introverted over this issue. So allowing yourself to be transparent with those goals. Over time, you can take this process and do it with anything. And as you're doing it with those things, let's say maybe around business development, the more transparent you're willing to be with the greatest number of stakeholders that could make the greatest difference for you, what you'll begin to see are a number of people pulling in your direction, leverage pulling in your direction, so that as you move through your goals are not based on your singular effort, which is what most people you're competing against are dealing with. They're competing only as themselves. They don't have alignment around them. That's what I wish for you. And that's what I want to encourage you to do by being transparent and going to one person in your personal life and one person in your business life. So as I said, I'm going to get better at knowing how to answer your questions and interacting with you. I am more than happy to take any questions that you might have live as well in the future, as well as if you email them in. I can be reached at info at Kelley Group INTL. That's KELLEY Group, and then the abbreviation for international, INTL.com. If you have any questions, every week there will be at least 1 to 2 themes, and any questions that were sent in, I'm going to do everything that I can to answer them. It truly is my intention to contribute. About 5 or 6 years ago, an individual that I consider to be a mentor went live every week. And I watched him every single week. And there were days where I would schedule my work so that I could actually listen to his wisdom. And it made a huge difference. And I would love to be able to make that difference for some of you, if not all of you. Thank you for tuning in today. I hope this made a difference. These are the threats to growth. And I'll look forward to seeing you guys next Tuesday. Thank you guys. Bye-bye.